So what I'll do here is I'll let the panelists introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself last because this is about these guys, not me. So.
Oh, starting on my end.
Yeah.
Okay, hi. I'm Gabriella Rubin Deveaux. I have been an end user my entire career. I've been the head of real estate for the last 4 companies I've been at. Most recently, I was at BuzzFeed for 5 years, so I will be representing the tenant.
I'm Iris Dawson. I'm the Vice President of InRange Solutions. We're a full turnkey program project management firm who does in-house engineering, site acquisition, zoning permitting, compliance, and construction management.
Hi, my name is Josh Broder. I'm the CEO of Tilson. We're a services company that designs and builds all manner of networks and develops and leases back 5G infrastructure for operators.
Hi, and I'm Martin Cassidy. I'm responsible for strategic carrier relations at Boingo Wireless. And I've moved from a vendor, Ericsson and Cisco environment, into a managed service, neutral host company, wireless independent, and I'm really looking forward to this.
It's going to be good. So my name is Jonathan Rowney. I'm principal engineer at RanPlan Wireless. We're a software company that designs an RF planning tool that deals with both indoor and outdoor wireless networks. We do have a behemoth of a subject, and CBRS from the previous talks certainly has the opportunity to be a disruptor in the wireless industry. However, I feel that we should get one misnomer out the way that, you know, CBRS is the RF side of it. It's a band. It's 3.5 gigahertz. Now, the wonderful opportunity that we have there is we can deploy both LTE and 5G NR at 3.5 gigahertz, and there's multiple different business cases for that. Now, you've heard enough of me speaking, so we'll focus the discussion over here, and I'm going to sit over here so I'm not shouting at you guys, even though I've got a microphone, and it also makes me a little bit more comfortable. So in terms of the technology side of things, from previous talks, it seems one of the big challenges for CBRS is a question of quality. So how do you believe that question of quality can be addressed? And do you believe that's going to be along the lines of, you know, traditional KPIs that are relatively static, or something that's going to be different? And I'll open this up to Josh to start with, and I'll open it up to the rest of the floor.
Sure, thanks, John. So we often talk about wireless coverage in the terms of coverage, where it works and where it doesn't work, and capacity, how much data we're able to move over it. And as we move boldly into the 5G world, we're increasingly talking about something qualitative, things like latency. And so we're not just talking about how much data we can pass, but how we pass it, the fact that it's uninterrupted, the fact that we can transit between networks without losing our sessions. And so one of the things that's happening outside today with 5G is going outside first. And as it goes outside first, we will now have access for users in places where the quality, not just the capacity and the coverage, are much better than they used to be. And so as we look into the built environment and having users transit between different places outside and inside, we start to have concerns about slipping in whatever quality metrics we define for 5G, you know, on a carrier-by-carrier basis. And I think in particular, contiguous sessions and smooth handoff being challenged as we come inside onto legacy systems.
And I guess along those lines, I'll open it up to the rest.
Maybe I'll jump on this one next. So quality is relative to what we have really here. So on one hand, we've got Wi-Fi, which is a very cost-effective system. And on the other hand, we have the carrier-based LTE networking, which is a very robust system and actually has a common clock. Common clock's important, and you get your own channel. Wi-Fi is very cost-effective, can be fast. So CBRS actually is more to the LTE and carrier side in terms of technology, very much more, because you can get your own channel. So there is definitely a higher quality that you can get than not. Wi-Fi 6 is catching up, though. It's getting closer and closer. Interestingly, the cost of a chip for Wi-Fi is about currently a third to a quarter the cost of a chip in the carrier LTE environment. So you can see that flow, and you can see why Wi-Fi has established such a foothold. But I think on quality, it really, you kind of decide what you want and how much you're going to pay for it, and that drives the decision. To me, as an end user, either Wi-Fi or an LTE-based system, right now, for the things that I do, the quality is good enough for each. If I'm thinking about augmented reality in the future, I might want to move to a system that has a higher quality and less latency.
Just jumping on that, then, we were having this conversation outside, and like I said, if I'm going to implement something into my office, I want to know exactly what I'm using it for. And so right now, it feels a little bit premature for me to jump on this bandwagon. I would probably be waiting to see more of, if we are changing our programs and how we're functioning to warrant putting something like that in. Right now, if I put it in, no one would even know about it.
Sure, I think you bring up a great point. I think we're in a bit of a state of limbo in where our ecosystem is moving towards. With all these different emerging technologies, as I'm learning about them, I tend to find, coming from the development perspective, that I'm left with a lot more questions than I am answers. I think it's clear that we're moving to a place where telecom is going to become that fourth utility. I think that's clear, but how we're going to get there and what that's going to look like, I think there's still a lot to be figured out. Anecdotally, I'm taking a class right now through MIT regarding how to bring your organization into this next era regarding mainly IoT. And I think one of their lessons, they were talking about how if you were to ask a 10-year-old kid, how do you turn the light switch on? How does it work the light? And what would you need to do if you need to move that across the room? And their instinct is to say, you just unstick it and you move it somewhere else. It works through Wi-Fi. And I think the point is, we're going to move into a place where we're really surrounded by those innovations, and we need that flexibility. And I think just right now, there's not enough of those answers out there to really decide which one you're going to go with.
Right, it's kind of a situation, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I love being an early adapter on things, but this is not something that I, right now, would be an early adapter on. I'm trying to kind of sit back, let other people play in that, and then go through a couple of iterations, and then maybe jump on, but not now. And most of the people that I work with would probably answer the light bulb question the same way, the light switch question.
So it may be worth talking about the very nature of CBRS itself for a minute, sort of in reference to that. Maybe we should wait a little bit. So think about CBRS. It's a spectrum, right? Not a radio technology. And so the CBRS spectrum can be used with LTE, and it can be used with 5G NR. And so today, for the most part, we're facing different equipment sets for those two uses of the spectrum. And we were chatting earlier about a test that I'm sure didn't happen yesterday, but I read about it yesterday at Ericsson in Ottawa, where they tested the use of DSS technology to take a modern radio and with modified software utilize CBRS over both an LTE standard and a 5G NR standard on a single box. And so that's in the lab today, not available for deployment, but it's probably not too far out. And so as we face the idea of trying to make in-building technology decisions, do we do Wi-Fi? Do we do Wi-Fi plus LTE? Do we do Wi-Fi plus LTE plus 5G? One thing we probably expect to be right around the corner would be the ability to deploy a single box that could use CBRS over LTE and 5G NR. And I'd hate to be the last guy that bought two separate boxes before those were available in months.
Now, along those lines, do you guys believe that CBRS is going to be a catalyst to drive people to think outside of the box, and the box being that building? Because as you say, CBRS is great potentially for one layer of the network, but it's going to struggle to be an isolated layer. It's going to be reliant on either a carrier-driven layer or something else.
So in our carrier deployments today, we're seeing them asking us to add provisions for CBRS at existing sites. So this would be in places where they're using their dedicated spectrum across multiple frequencies, and they want to add CBRS as additional spectral density on the site. I think what this opens the door to, though, is the idea, particularly in the in-building environment, is having an operator who can provide a system that serves multiple carriers and perhaps having an intermediate third party in some situations. And so I think we'll see these early deployments be in a carrier-specific model because the radio manufacturers are so focused on meeting their carriers' demands. But as the enterprise demands rise, I think we'll see opportunities for new players, new operators to provide some kind of a third-party blended service that could provide a handoff to a carrier at a much higher level of abstraction.
So we had a side discussion, the team here, before coming in for the panel, and Gabriella said, so this is going to go to you next, Gabriella.
I figured.
She said, my guys don't need this now, everything just works. So what we've heard here is the carriers are actually beginning to deploy CBRS because there is a view of the future. So a lot of this is about timing. And I think it's important that one sees that CBRS, unlike, say, small cell technology, is very shareable across carriers, and therefore the cost can come down. So the point of entry into this market and being exciting, you don't have to wait until people can buy something really expensive. You know, the cost of CBRS can be shared across carriers, maybe 3 carriers, maybe 4, whatever. And therefore, I'm seeing that the timing between the carriers putting this in and your users may be shorter than you think. What do you think, Gabriella?
Yeah, well, what we were talking about outside was, I am responsible for procuring real estate. So when I go into a building, my IT team will say, you can't look at a building that doesn't have anything, less than Cat 6. And I was asking then, well, what's the next thing? And how far down the line and road is this where I'm going to be looking for a building that's got CBRS, right? Or is it something that I have to implement? And that's what I kind of needed to know and be educated on as the tenant, to know, and we are fortunate that we are pretty much in a big open floor plan with windows on all sides, and so our wireless does work very well. But I've been in plenty of buildings and offices where that's not the case. So is that something that we want to be ahead of, or we want to solve when there's an issue?
I know from me looking at it from the development perspective, InRange, our firm, is generally the middleman between the carrier operator and the venue. So I'm looking at it from who's my audience and what does my pitch need to be to really sell that service. And I think overall, when we're talking CBRS, it's a little bit tough right now. There's a lot of words coming out. There's 5G, CBRS, Wi-Fi 6, Dish. We don't really know what Dish is going to be rolling out. So I think right now it's really hard. Even cost. There's a lot of questions left when we're talking about cost. We were talking about what it's going to cost to be integrated into the SaaS and have them manage the channels that way. And I think that makes it really hard for a building owner or venue owner to really know what's going to give them the best return on investment because they can't really weigh their options right now.
So does anybody know when LTE was first deployed? I didn't really enter this part of telecom until after it was on the street. When it's like 8, 10, 12 years? I don't know, kind of a long time, right? And so in the LTE deployment cycle, it took a while before private LTE really started to pick up and have traction. Really, it was carrier-driven for many, many, many years. And even now, private LTE is in its early days of adoption. And so when we think about CBRS as an emerging spectrum that can support 5G and our technology, we could assume that while there may be a compressed adoption cycle between carriers and third-party operators using it, you can imagine that we're going to go through the process of having carrier adoption and then sophisticated, dedicated operator adoption who could provide a multi-carrier environment. And by the time you get to a private network, we're a little bit farther down the line. Now, the only thing we know about technology is that the cycles compress, but there's certainly an order of operations here where the most sophisticated players adopt first, and by the time it lands in the hands of a sophisticated IT department and facilities management team in a large organization, it's been around for a while. There's a well-worn path. There's a sales channel from the manufacturers that are focused on that segment to make it accessible. So I can't hazard a guess at how long that will take, but I think it'll be years and not months.
So Gabriella, your buildings sound to be very orderly, and there's lots of ingress of signal from outside.
In some sense.
And the Wi-Fi sounds pretty orderly. So I come across buildings.
Dispatch elevators never work, so some things work.
I come across buildings that aren't that orderly. Nobody can get any cellular coverage. Huge old buildings and small windows. And then the Wi-Fi, everybody's got their own Wi-Fi. It's a multi-tenant building, and it's wild. Nothing works properly. Everybody's on the same channel. So in that environment, getting clear additional bandwidth for use with CBRS, 5G NR, is really, really important. And I think that may lead the carriers to earlier deployment, and actually may, in these disorderly buildings, may lead to more pull as well. That's just my view.
That's interesting. So that leads me to the next question, I guess, just to take it back up one step. And there's a lot of discussion. We're talking about CBRS, which is the 3.5 band. We're talking about LTE. We're talking about Wi-Fi 6. We're talking about NR. Now, and this is a question to you all. Do you believe there is the understanding yet of not necessarily just the use cases, actually, yes, the use cases of how these things can be leveraged. We talked a lot about the barriers to adoption here, but what do you see as the use cases and the opportunities there for it?
I think for me, when there's use cases, I think CBRS 3.5 really, when we're talking about barriers, it lowers the barrier to entry for a lot of new players. It gives them a foot in the door without having to spend exorbitant amount of money bidding on spectrum. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think for development firms like InRange and those like us, I think with new players coming in, it allows us to be able to diversify our clientele pool, which is great. And I also think, and we talked about this a little bit before, maybe this isn't a use case for buildings like Gabriella is working in, but we're gonna start looking at smaller buildings, and even with 5G, when we're talking densification, we're going to start looking at candidates that we never would have touched before. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, I think Iris makes a really important point about this lowering the barrier of entry for new players. And not only is the spectrum more available, but the accoutrements of being a carrier, or at least a front haul provider, are available, right? You can go get a hosted core from someone. Most of the software to do this stuff is available in the cloud. And so as that becomes increasingly available, we start to bump into different kinds of facilities than offices that may have faster adoption of 5G and our standard kind of quality demands. And I'm particularly thinking of facilities with automation. So if you can imagine the factory of the future, I've never been to Ericsson's new robot factory that's building 5G radios or is being built to build 5G radios, but you can assume there's not a lot of people. There's a lot of robots moving around, and the assumption of quality, low latency, and seamless handoff starts to demand something like the promise of CBRS could deliver.
I think that private LTE use case is really, really interesting. I mean, my company puts lots of infrastructure into airports, so baggage handling, security. There are all sorts of places where having a secure and very deterministic network is really, really helpful in clear spectrum. Another couple of use cases, of course, as well. That's where the traditional operators may acquire power licenses next year. And so we'll just see simple rebroadcast within buildings. And the beauty of CBRS is that a common system can support more than one carrier, so it reduces the cost. And the third use case that I'm interested in, Boingo's interested in, and we'll see how this plays out, is the roaming use case, because this is an LTE type infrastructure, so one can roam with the legacy carriers, can roam with others as well. And with dual SIM phones and eSIM, electronic SIMs, soft SIMs in there, roaming becomes easier as well. And then you see business cases that will bring the MSOs, the cable guys, in as well.
My answer is short. I think it's just the flexibility that would be, something we'd be interested in. To the fact that our offices are constantly evolving and always changing, I think that would be something that would be of interest to us.
Awesome. So it seems that we started off the discussion on a note of quality. And it's become very evident that there's, as with any deployment, there is a trade-off between quality, speed, and the actual being able to deliver the thing. So it seems like we're moving the discussions much less towards quality, because we are pushing things closer to the edge, and more towards accessibility. Now, you made a very good point about 5G NR. do you think that the 3.5 band will be a good vehicle to maybe empower new investment that will help drive those developments in NR?
Oh boy, I think it will. I mean, it's a just right spectrum. And I think its propagation characteristics make it useful for a broader range of use cases than simply millimeter wave. And so millimeter wave has a very important place in this story, but I think 3.5 adjacent to millimeter allows, a range of use cases that, aren't just a bunch of people clustered in an open area in a city center. I do think, though, that the enablement of those new use cases and low barrier of entry to players puts us at risk as an industry for a bit of balkanization of what the connectivity options will be as people transition a heterogeneous environment. So when we use the term HETNet or heterogeneous network, we have an assumption that it's got homogeneous management, that some higher force is helping that user across that heterogeneous network. And so as the barrier to entry to new players comes down, we may have a more complicated handoff environment and actually quality falling as people transit between, Wi-Fi enabled offload and traditional dedicated carrier bands and private networks or private networks on CBRS.
I think we'll see some carrier aggregation cross-technology too. I think that's important, so that there's kind of a base level and you can burst into CBRS for offload. And I think all those and you can set different quality thresholds, or you can make sure you always achieve a certain quality threshold by doing that. And I think that will necessarily drive some new applications and new cost points, lower cost points.
So we have quicker deliveries, potentially lower cost. Now, do you believe there are any other factors that would be particularly attractive to help build an investment case or a return on investment case? I know one of the things we were talking about in front of when we were all kind of sat very nervously waiting to come on stage was the security aspect of it as well.
Yeah. I mean, anytime I have an allocation of dollars of how I'm going to spend it in a space, for the most part, people want something tangible that they can see, touch, feel, whatever. And again, this is not an issue that I have to solve for right now, so it doesn't really warrant spending the money on something like this, at least today. And then I asked you about security, because, our Bevy machine has its own network, and that got hacked, so I just want to make sure anytime we're putting something into our space, how secure is this? I don't know. You have to educate me on it, because it's always a concern.
Shall we try?
Sure.
It's as secure as LTE.
So not secure.
No, it is secure.
That's considered secure. Would you say so, Josh?
I would say it's considered secure, yes.
One interesting thing there is we talked about Wi-Fi, and we talked about how Wi-Fi 6 potentially has addressed some of the security holes there. But one of Wi-Fi's greatest successes is its uptake, and it's also its greatest weakness, right? It's as soon as anything becomes very widely adopted, and adopted in a range of use cases where it's attractive to abuse, then there's potentially more risk there to abuse that technology. So my question here would be, if we see a high uptake of LTE or 5G NR due to the CBRS band, and we have this deployed specifically in an unlicensed allocation, where do you believe the responsibility lies to ensure that remains secure? The provider, whether that be a managed service provider, the person investing in it, the end user even?
I think in most security applications, you'd say all of the above, that true security comes from defense in depth. As we think about private use of CBRS in a LTE or 5G NR kind of application, you could imagine that it particularly in the early days, requires a relatively sophisticated user to participate on it. And because of the inherent characteristics that we've just talked about, like why do you want a network that has the kind of qualitative things we care about, low latency, smooth handoffs, and things like that? Those are things where there may be life safety implications. There may be production implications, and these are areas where high availability and sort of assurance of performance are really important. And so my belief is that users, in addition to the network operators, are going to be highly engaged in securing those facilities.
So I think what we're talking about here is air interface security. And first of all, I contend that Wi-Fi now has mechanisms to be secure. And of course, I would say that because I used to be the service provider Wi-Fi product guy in Cisco. But LTE has very, very high air interface security. So I'd be comfortable there. Nevertheless, for any interfaces, if one wants a higher level again, then you can have a tunnel, a VPN, a virtual private network over the top, and that's what many corporate companies do.
I think early in the conversation, we talked about what is this user experience of walking into a place and affiliating with the Wi-Fi. So in places that have great Wi-Fi, the shortcoming that comes to mind is the lack of the seamless roaming of a visitor coming into a facility and having to affiliate with that Wi-Fi somehow. And so the more we lower the barriers of participating in an air interface and having that be automatic, I think the more inherently insecure these situations become, and the lower the user's awareness of the network that they're transiting, which is, so I think there's a real trade-off here. Do we want it more secure, or do we want it more seamless?
I think you make a really good point there about the user intervention in Wi-Fi. Still not seamless. Passpoint, which I was involved in developing, is a very secure interface and used for offload for the likes of AT&T and Sprint now. And in that case, it's seamless. But of course, if I'm a guest and I go into one of your buildings, it's not so seamless because I have to log on. I have to have a single sign-up.
You are welcome to come to our bathrooms. You know, I mean, we've never had a situation. But again, I've been in other buildings where you go to certain pockets of, you know, the back of the building, back of a room, and you're like, oh, I have no bars. Right? That's, you know, and we're fortunate that, you know, we don't have that situation, but I understand that there are buildings and offices that do. But so again, I just kind of come back to, you know, I'm always very hypersensitive about security, and you brought up that, well, it's new. So when it becomes more populated, will it be less secure? I don't know. And then I also asked, we have offices in co-working facilities, and so we always want our own network there, and can, you know, will this transfer in an environment like that as well?
Very good. So it seems like we've gone from, hey, there's quality, there's speed, there's some concerns over security. Now, I know a lot of what we're talking about with CBRS, we're talking a couple of years out. So a lot of what we're talking about could change. So a question to you all is, do you believe that the existing tool set for LTE and 5G NR that's being delivered is sufficient to help the current audience for CBRS take that up? And if you don't feel it's sufficient, what do you believe that maybe needs adding to that tool set? And that could be it could be training, it could be, you know, any hardware, any of those things.
I think we have to take CBRS to scale first off. We have to test the SaaS infrastructure on managed service providers, and we have to test this network out, and that will be the next step. So my company has a test network at Dallas Love Field, and others are doing the same thing now too. And then we'll bring that to scale.
I agree, and I think if the cost is going to be tenable, we'll need to be able to deploy CBRS on a single box with both the LT standard and the 5G NR standard, because this is likely to happen during a time frame when we haven't, you know, hit total handset refresh cycle time.
I agree with both of them, and I think for me, what we're really missing is clarity. Clarity about what this is all going to look like, clarity about the cost, clarity about what the other technologies are going to look like in order to really get that adoption. I think in clarity out to the public as well. I think right now there's so much hype surrounding all of these technologies coming out. I know for me, I'm a mom of 3 young kids, and just the other day on, you know, my Facebook moms group for my hometown, someone posts what's going on with this empty lot in town. It looks like it's under construction. Another person posts it's a new cell tower, and immediately people are saying, I hope it's not 5G, posting articles saying we're all gonna die. So I think in us finding clarity through these conversations and these open forums and getting it out there, I think adoption's gonna be a lot greater, and some of those barriers will be reduced.
I'm just gonna wait and see.
Tentative. Which is good. I mean, there's like I keep saying, there's challenges, there's opportunities, and the future seems like it's, hey, we're going to wait and see how this plays out. Now, do you believe that there is a role for bodies such as CBRS or Alliance, such as other bodies out there that can help with that adoption, help standardize it in a way?
So I'm not up to date with what the Alliance has done in the last few weeks, but what I have seen is that there's been a strong look at how to operationalize CBRS, which didn't happen with some of the other standards like Passpoint that I was involved in. So I think the time to market will be sped up by what's going on in the Alliance, for sure.
Anything else to add? Or is that good? So it seems like there is definitely there are mechanisms out there that can help reduce that cycle for adoption. Now, to pull the conversation back a little bit, we focus very heavily on InBuilding, but let's not forget that the FCC has also approved much higher output power for outdoor cells. Now, do you guys believe this is going to be an attractive use case, maybe getting people to think outside of the building onto more of a campus environment?
We know it will be, because the only place where we're actively deploying CBRS sites is outside as embedded base upgrades for carriers. I think beyond that, the campus environment is a great opportunity for either a sophisticated owner or a third-party neutral host to provide some kind of service that works both inside and outside. I think most of the country, we're likely to have enough availability of the CBRS. In other words, its secondary use will be ubiquitously and reliably available to have that be a campus use. And I think the 5G NR standard also promises to potentially provide sufficient bandwidth to backhaul over the RAN.
And actually, if I just extend that into rural, and actually plenty of places like Santa Clara still have ADSL from some suppliers, so you'll see short backhaul. And there, some of the limitations that devices haven't yet caught up with CBRS, although they are looking to do so within the next 6 months. That becomes different because your set-top box could have an interface, CBRS interface on it, and I can put CBRS on a pole, and I can just literally jump over the ADSL and provide reasonable internet speed.
So I guess this would be much closer to, say, a fixed wireless access use case.
Yeah, we're actually seeing in the field with some of our clients who have fixed wireless access deployments using some other technology, white space, ad hoc, proprietary Wi-Fi kind of technologies, are either migrating towards CBRS capable radios or deploying CBRS capable radios as a primary focus, A, because they think it'll do a better job at that application, and B, because they think there'll be opportunity for either roaming or offloading of traffic to cellular carriers at some point in the future. These would be not the kind of internet service providers that you would traditionally think of as being someone that would be selling an access service to a cellular carrier.
So essentially providing connectivity in areas where it may be otherwise difficult to run cable to.
Yes, exactly.
Now, is that something that would be, I guess, attractive on an enterprise side?
Oh yeah, no, I was going to jump in and say, now you're making something, of a case that would be interesting to us, since we're all on laptops and we like to work anywhere and most likely outside the office, which makes me think I can get less footprints when I look at space. If people can work anywhere, that's attractive. But it sounds like where this is going to hit first is not going to be for the offices. It sounds like it's going to be like factories and other types of industries before it trickles down to the office. And we're just going to jump on board because that's what everyone else is doing, or that's the norm. But it doesn't seem in some cases we're the first to jump on. This is not something that seems that we're going to take the first step.
Yeah, and I think it's going back to that, it's part of that is what devices is this going to be available on to start? I don't think it's going to be so much the laptops as we were talking about. I think there's a better use case for IoT heavy environments like manufacturing, or maybe in a stadium you want to bring technology to the seats, right? Something that you can use to push the technology back to your patrons, but I'm not sure it's going to be that widely available in the coming years right in your laptop.
So I think what we're talking about there is the adoption rate in different verticals. So my company's involved in airports big time, and we see, because you have so much volume of traffic, that getting any additional bandwidth and being able to share it across infrastructure will mean that that particular vertical will be right there with the leading edge.
Yeah, we think intelligent transportation will also be a really important early adopting vertical.
All right, well, thanks so much.